merci Dr. Raspe, et merci à tous. C'est déjà très riche, cette colloque. Parce que c'était annoncé comme colloque bilingue, je vais faire ma présentation en anglais parce que c'était déjà préparé plus ou moins en anglais, mais je suis prêt à répondre à quelques questions que vous posez ou en anglais ou en français. But one feature of the war in Iran that really sets it apart from all the other wars is the manner in which it exploded into a regional conflict. The United States, which joined Israel in attacking Iran on February 28th, has at least 13 military bases in other countries throughout the Middle East, and many of them, possibly all of them, had some role in the joint invasion of Iran. Iran responded rapidly by launching counterattacks against U.S. bases in Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as Diego Garcia and a base in Turkey, where a large number of U.S. military personnel are stationed. The United States has at least 128 military bases in at least 51 countries around the world, counting its own foreign bases and those of other countries that house U.S. military operations. If small installations like individual buildings or radar stations are included in the total, the number of U.S. military facilities around the world rises to many hundreds. Estimates are 750, 800, something like that. The exact number is not known simply because some of these installations are secret. Most of them were established after the Second World War, although some existed already in the second half of the 19th century. The earliest sites were mostly very small and had limited functions such as the storage of coal, which was at the time the main fuel for U.S. Navy ships. They needed to have coal located in various parts of the world because you couldn't project your power by sending a ship someplace where it wouldn't be able to get back from. So the United States made arrangements with places like the Kingdom of Hawaii in the 1860s and various other places to store coal. And sometimes these had a slightly larger military value. The first substantial military facility that the United States created abroad was the naval station, which was also a coal storage site, at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. That was in 1903. The United States is not alone in having a network of military bases, but it is by far the largest network that exists around the world. Foreign military bases have become a classic means of projecting power beyond a country's borders and even beyond its region. They are generally established not only to be a display of military power in a location that the country using the base considers relevant for its interests and including national security, but also to allow that country's military forces to be physically closer to any armed conflict that may be deemed to warrant the use of that power. In general, foreign military bases are established through bilateral treaties and similar agreements with the host countries that are made during peacetime, at least peacetime between the two countries involved. They often take the form of leases, and they can bring substantial benefits to the host country in both economic and military terms. The host country often gets an economic and financial boost from the presence of a foreign base through the rent or the other compensation from the country using it. It also can benefit from the money spent on its territory by the personnel from abroad who are stationed at the base. The base itself, as was the case in Guantanamo in particular, can become a significant employer of the local population. That was, of course, before the Cuban Revolution. Additionally, a foreign base on a host state's territory can accelerate the host state's development. It can open up new trade possibilities and in various ways can contribute to the host state itself becoming more powerful in its own right. The military, those are the economic benefits. The military benefits that accrue to the host country come from the fact that it is typically the less powerful partner in the bilateral arrangement. Without having to bear the cost of enlarging its own armed forces, the host country benefits from the implied protection that the foreign soldiers on its territory represent. They enhance the host country's security as a supplemental deterrent to any attack by an adversary, especially as the country using the base often has more advanced weapons and personnel with specialized training than the host country does. In short, foreign bases can be useful not only for the country using the base, but also for the host country, which is one reason why so many of the host countries find these things attractive and why so many foreign bases exist around the world. So, seems pretty good. What could go wrong? At the same time, there is, of course, a downside, and the war in Iran has made that lesson very clear. The host country is exposed to the possibility that the base may be attacked by an adversary of the country using it if that country becomes involved in an armed conflict. Military bases are always established with a view toward their possible use in a future war, and that is the thing that tends to get dismissed because of all of the potential benefits. It may seem like a nebulous future possibility, and the benefits can be very immediate and substantial. But as early as 1912, in relation to Guantanamo, students at the U.S. Naval War College who were studying to become naval officers were taught that foreign bases look specifically to a condition of war, and while the host country may be neutral in a war that involves the country using the base, neither its neutrality nor its sovereignty on the territory housing the base protects the base from becoming a target. In other words, a foreign base can attract armed conflict to the sovereign territory of the host country. Even though this was what was being, it was evolving thought at the time, and it reached the point where this is what was being taught to future U.S. military officers. Up until that time, it never actually happened that a foreign base was attacked. There were very few foreign bases in the world. But it was already clear that this was a danger. Now, under international humanitarian law, military bases are legitimate targets during an armed conflict. According to Article 52, Paragraph 2 of the Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions, it says attacks shall be limited strictly to military objectives. Insofar as objects are concerned, military objectives are limited to those objects which, by their nature, location, purpose, or use, make an effective contribution to military action, and whose total or partial destruction, capture, or neutralization in the circumstances ruling at the time offers a definite military advantage. Bases are very clearly, including foreign bases, are very clearly within that definition. The risk that a foreign base may become a vector that brings war to a host state has been largely ignored as foreign military bases proliferated over the years. Most arrangements were made when the countries that wanted to establish bases were not in a war with one or more third countries. Any threat to the host state, as I said, might very easily seem remote. And when they contrast that to their immediate needs, the benefits would have seemed pretty significant. The lack of attention paid to this risk persists to this day. It can be seen in the efforts by Mauritius to regain from the United Kingdom sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, where Diego Garcia is located. Information that I have directly, but I can't really discuss the details, made it clear that the Mauritian government was unaware that succeeding in getting sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, and particularly Diego Garcia, could open the door for a foreign war to spread to its territory. That agreement, by the way, ran into a political snag last week and won't happen in the immediate future. But the Iranian missile fired toward the US base on Diego Garcia came 2 days after I discussed this situation, or the risk, with somebody who's with the government there. And so it became clear to them that I wasn't kidding very quickly. Nobody knows what kind of peace will emerge when the fighting stops in Iran, but one thing is likely. Countries around the world will become more reticent to host foreign bases on their territory. Already there are calls to close US bases in the Middle East. I don't think that's really going to happen in the near future because of what's happening now. But just 2 days ago, the American Enterprise Institute, which is a fairly influential think tank in the United States and has people who have been in government involved with it, called for closing the bases, closing some bases in the Middle East. So you're beginning to get this reaction. And that's pretty ironic, because this war, by virtue of Iran's choice of how to retaliate, by going after a lot of bases all at once in countries that were not participating in the war, this war might, in the longer term, favor global peace by limiting the mechanism by which wars spread in the future. Although the war in Iran shows how real the risk to host states can be of having a foreign military base, only a few countries systematically say no. Cambodia, Laos, Malta, generally small countries that could benefit enormously, but are aware of the risks either because of conflicts that had occurred in their regions or in their own territory in the past. These prohibitions are sometimes in the Constitution, other times it's simply policy. While international law may consider an adversary's bases used during a war to be legitimate targets, the Iran war shows as well that the risk to the host country also includes other areas outside the base. Now, it's always against international law to target civilians during a war, but it's not always a violation to counterattack sites in a host country that are actively complicit in facilitating the attacks launched from the base, as long as the counterattack is proportional and targets only the implicated sites. These legal restrictions were evidently ignored when Iran attacked US allies in the Middle East, because the targets included oil facilities and other things, much more than just the US bases. But one can see how Donald Trump's assertion in January, when he said, "I don't need international law," and the prima facie illegality of the Israeli and US aggression against Iran only weeks later might have encouraged Iran to take a somewhat dismissive attitude toward strict compliance with international law itself. All of this serves as a reminder that while international law is largely effective, it is sometimes an imperfect constraint on the conduct of states at war, because it also exists in parallel with geopolitical forces and pressures that can induce violations. All of this reduces considerably the attractiveness to countries of hosting foreign military bases. Ironically, as I say, the war may favor global peace, not in the immediate term, but more generally by altering the attitudes that have allowed these foreign bases around the world to flourish. If this happens, the process is not likely to be quick or smooth, because countries are normally obliged by international law to comply with their agreements with other states. And most bases exist through long-term agreements, so their expiration may be years away. Yet, other factors may work in favor of accelerating the closure of bases, or at least the non-proliferation of bases. The practical reasons for having military bases around the world have diminished through advances in technology, for example. With everything from cyber activities to hypersonic weapons, countries are gaining the capability to exert military power anywhere in the world almost instantly from their own territory. Geographical proximity to potential adversaries is no longer so necessary. Another motivating factor that could limit future bases is that they're really expensive. And every government is complaining how much it has trouble with military expenses. The military base abroad has ongoing costs for personnel, equipment, maintenance, and everything else, and these can't be easily reduced. It would be naive to think that winding down the proliferation of foreign military bases would make wars less frequent or less devastating. That depends on addressing the causes of conflict. The benefit is more in reducing the propagation of the armed conflicts that do occur. This alone can be significant for peace as a decisive factor in whether a country is drawn into a war that other countries are fighting. Slowing or ending the proliferation of foreign military bases will not stop wars, but perversely, this one, the one that's currently going on in Iran, may have this positive impact by removing a means by which war began to spread in the 20th century. It happened only a couple of times up until the current war. And this war reminds everybody that the threat is not really so nebulous. It can actually happen. And even though it may seem slight, if it does happen, it can be pretty severe.